Welcome to another episode of This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast. Season 2, Episode 24. Your safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, and even religion, where we will take it all very seriously, but not too seriously. I finally talk about Ukraine without trying to be Professor Lecture much, a preachy cunt. Hell is actually frozen over. I sing the praises of social media. And Episode 9 recap of Better Call Saul, the final season. Thank you all for listening. Like, review, subscribe, distribute, demonstrate a capacity and knowledge of social media in excess of my own. This Is Why I Don't Vote podcast is on Patreon. If you like what you hear, please support the program. Away we go.
Act 1, Ukraine, and our capacity to recognize when our actions cause more problems than they solve.
I'm trying, and it's not easy, to refrain from being in my ego and being a preachy cunt. In editing the pieces over the course of the last few weeks, I've had to take out some content. I'm not sure I've been exactly or entirely satisfied with the content. I believe in what I'm saying, I just wrestle with how to say it. And it's not easy to invite what is contrary to your nature, contrary to who you've been for so long in your life, invite that other thing to speak through you in order to try to better or more tactfully, I guess, convey a message. It is precisely because of that I have refrained from addressing the topic that I'm going to address in this segment, in this week's episode, Ukraine, the United States, the Western world's involvement in the invasion of Ukraine. It took me a while to settle on how I would actually put this into perspective, and not just in the perspective of some kind of global phenomenon that's encompassed the entire world economy, really to look at it from a more human perspective, from an individual perspective, the things that we all have to address on a day-to-day basis. So let me set the stage for that. Bear with me, if you will. As we are wont to do, we like to forget. I believe it was in 2014. It was during the Obama administration when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. There was a very pro-Russia president of Ukraine. And although you'll never be able to prove it, and who knows to what extent it was forces within Ukraine, forces within Western Europe, it was the United States, that leader was recalled. There was a recall election, I believe, and then Zelensky was elected president in the recall election. Russia, if you recall, immediately called bullshit, argued this was a Western attempt to get a pro-West, a pro-United States, a pro-NATO leader into the presidency of Ukraine so that Ukraine could eventually become a member of NATO. Now, there was things in the middle, there's doings, there's policies, there's politics, there's global intrigue. Fast forward, Russia invades Ukraine. If you know anything about the history of that region, if you know anything about the recent history, if you know anything about the politics of that region today, there are many Russian-speaking people, Russian sympathizers in eastern Ukraine. It was an easy transition to say, okay, there are a number of Western influences in the country of Ukraine. We have these native Russian or Russian-speaking people or Russian-sympathizing people in eastern Ukraine. There's a bunch of Nazis there, which is in fact true. There are a bunch of Nazis, neo-Nazis, 21st century Nazis in that region, and they want to expel, if not exterminate, these native Russian people. We're going to go into eastern Ukraine to save them. That summary may not be comprehensive, but I believe it does give a high-level overview of how Russia justified the invasion of Ukraine and how they were trying to set their own people up to support such an invasion. We here in the West, we call bullshit. We say, hey, this is just a proxy. This is just some rationale for pushing back on the borders of NATO, for compromising the integrity of an independent nation, one that Russia has always coveted since the fall of the Soviet Union. You're going to kill a bunch of innocent people. We condemn as much. We're going to push back. I think everyone in the West could embrace not only this rationale, but could embrace the consequences that would come with the rationale. What are those consequences? The West decided to ostracize Russia from an economic standpoint, for all intents and purposes, eliminate them from the world economy, and then began supplying a number of different types of arms to the Ukrainian people in order to fight the Russian army. Tons and tons of equipment, billions of dollars worth of stuff. Cut Russia off from the world economy, give the people of Ukraine the type of armament they would need in order to fight a first world army. Does that pretty well summarize where we're at right now? Good. Something happened. We in the West, as a sympathetic, a compassionate, a free people, condemned what happened, began to rally to a cause. We're willing to sacrifice time and money and energy in order to support that cause. Going into this whole endeavor, we all had the best of intentions, did we not? What about the results? What about the outcome? And what about that outcome can actually shine a light on, can show us whether or not we truly had the best of intentions, whether it was true altruism, whether it was true empathy or compassion. We have all of these types of problems in our daily lives. We come to conclusions about those problems. We take actions. Often we think these actions are justified based on altruistic intentions. What about the outcome to our actions shine a light on the true motives of our intentions? Let's look at the macro. Let's look at the Ukraine example. It's guns and money. Let's not do guns and money in that order. We're going to do money and guns. The money. We have ostracized Russia from the world economy. And what has happened? As I stated in the podcast segment last week, this has been a boon to Russia unlike any in its modern history. Russia is now richer as a country than it has been probably since the fall of the Soviet Union. The price of energy, no matter what the commodity of energy, oil, natural gas, these prices have skyrocketed. Russia has been able to choke off Western Europe from some of its most important energy sources. Russia is now selling oil at a discount to China and to India at such a rate that it is making more money and shipping more oil than it ever has in its history. Oil prices worldwide have skyrocketed such that India can take that discounted oil and can actually sell it to the United States for a profit. And we're so desperate for that oil, we'll buy it. So these sanctions that have been levied by the West have completely backfired. They are not working. They have not worked. They are not going to work in the future. What about guns? What about guns? Biden gets $50 billion in addition to the hundreds of millions of dollars that were already sent to Ukraine. Biden gets an additional $50 billion from Congress to send more weapons, more technology, and it has not worked. The media has done a terrible job at communicating this, but we see foreign armies like we see our army. There may be interdivisional rivalries in the U.S. Army, U.S. Air Force, U.S. Navy, U.S. Marines. Whether or not there are interdivisional rivalries, this is still one cohesive military unit. They do work in conjunction with one another, even if begrudgingly. That is not how many armies around the world operate, and Ukraine is a prime example. There is a very disjointed, there is a very fragmented military structure within Ukraine. And once Russia invaded, that became apparent. There were all these paramilitary groups that were operating independently in Ukraine, and they became part of what we would call the overall military strategy, even though they weren't part of the actual military. Naturally, when you don't have a cohesive military unit, you're not going to be able to have a cohesive policy in order to defend a cohesive or a broad area of your country. Moreover, to the extent that these people are all trying to cooperate, they weren't cooperating prior to the invasion. You're going to have those that are going to go off in their own direction, that are going to act independently. And acting independently when you're trying to defend against an opponent who's attacking you from multiple sides, that's going to cause problems. And we are giving military equipment, some of the most advanced military equipment that exists on planet Earth, to people who are not part of the actual military, who aren't trained soldiers, and who have their own motives, their own ideologies, their own ends in mind in fighting this war in Ukraine. As we have seen over the course of the last few weeks, Russia making such great progress in the east of Ukraine, giving more guns has not worked. It has not stopped Russia from achieving their aims, at least in eastern Ukraine. So how does this outcome affect the way we look at our approach to this problem? If you have noticed, many politicians, they just can't help themselves. They just can't help but say the quiet part out loud. Many politicians have come out and said, Russia is our enemy. Let's bleed our enemy. We can use this Ukraine invasion as a proxy war to bleed and to weaken our enemy. I want to start fundamentally with the way these politicians have communicated the situation, because this is actually a great lesson for us, a reflection of who we are as a people, the way that we look at the problems in our own lives. You see problems the way that you see them based on your assumptions. Look at the fundamental assumption in the way most of these politicians are addressing the situation. Russia is our enemy. The assumption being Russia is our enemy. It is a conclusion. That country is our enemy. If you see that country, it doesn't matter whether or not it's Russia. If you see this other country as your enemy, they'll be your enemy. They will appear, they will present in the way that you see them. So these politicians have already set the die. The die has been cast. Russia is the enemy. Now, because they're the enemy, what are we going to do? We are going to bleed our enemy. We can use this Ukraine situation as an opportunity to weaken this nation, to bleed this nation, to cripple who we perceive is our enemy, Vladimir Putin, Russia. Is that an altruistic aim? Is that coming out of a sense of compassion or empathy? Is that an end that we all support? I gave money to the Red Cross. I gave money to the United Nations Refugee Fund. It wasn't a ton of money, but I actually gave money. I gave money because I, like many, were moved by what the Ukrainian people were going through because of this invasion. You're talking about millions of refugees over the course of 2-3 weeks, and all of the problems that that would cause from not only a regional standpoint. You're talking about Ukraine, you're talking about Poland, you're talking about Hungary and Moldavia and all of these other satellite countries. You're talking about a lot of families here. There are a lot of Ukrainians here who have strong family ties still in Ukraine. You're talking about people who now, their relatives are being shot, are being killed, are being displaced from their homes. These people are proud. They want to fight. The United States, for its part, has tried to support these people in that fight, but perhaps has been using these people in this fight. Again, the politicians, they say the quiet part out loud. Let's bleed Russia. Let's drain Russia. Let's weaken an opponent. The U.S., Great Britain, we have opposed any type of talks, any type of discussions, any type of negotiations to end the conflict now. We want them to fight. That's not what I donated to. Is that altruism? Is that coming to this situation with clean hands, with sincerity, with the best of intentions? Look at the situations in your life, in your personal life. This is what came through me. All of the times that I've gone into some kind of situation where I thought that my motives were pure, were sincere, were coming from the right place, and you go and you take action and it completely blows up in your face. Now, there is this posturing where you have in a lot of these self-improvement lectures and seminars and books, hey, you've got to take 2 steps back to take this giant leap forward. And you don't know that this thing blowing up in your face couldn't be the best thing that happened to you. That I do believe in. I do subscribe to. But, and I use that word intentionally, but you often need to then look at also the motives that you had in responding to the situation the way that you did. Were they actually pure? Were they sincere? Did you come in with clean hands? The outcome of your actions can actually be a reflection of your intentions. How pure was your heart? Because if you came in from a place of jealousy or anger or resentment, you're envious, you're gluttonous, and these things blow up in your face. The actions that you take end up causing you more problems than they solve. You should look at your intentions and say, is this what I really want? Am I responding in a mature, responsible, pure, clean way? I don't know about you, dear listener. Looking at that from below instead of above, I've often noticed that I don't have entirely pure motives. I don't have entirely clean hands. That some of the things that have happened have triggered in me my ego, past harm, past trauma, whatever it may be, and you bring that with you into the actions that you take in order to try and solve whatever problem, whatever situation exists. I turned this microphone on. I had preachy cunt coming out of me very quickly. I had to stop. I had to gather myself. I had to rethink how I wanted to posture this segment. And it took me weeks to do so. Simply look at the outcome of all of the actions that the United States, that the West has taken in the invasion of Ukraine. All of the sanctions have blown up in our face. All of the military aid has gone for naught. Now, there may be people wagging their finger right now, ready to argue with me that because Russia invaded and was not able to overtake the entire nation of Ukraine, that somehow that was a victory. But think about it. Our aid had not yet reached the country to the extent that it has now. Russia not being able to overtake the entire nation of Ukraine is more a comment on the Russian army and the problems within it than it is a commentary on the Ukrainian people, although brave and although they fought very hard, and the weapons that they had at their disposal. You see Russia reevaluating its aims. You see Russia leaning on some of its better divisions, its better leaders within the military, and you see them enjoying the kind of success that a first world superpower should enjoy in a conflict like this in the East, in the eastern part of Ukraine. Our motives as a nation, as a group of nations, are not pure. Russia is the enemy. We've already cast that die. And we want to bleed the enemy, and we're going to use the Ukrainian people to do so. This conflict isn't going to end anytime soon. This conflict is going to cause disruptions in the energy markets on planet Earth for years to come. There is no telling where the weapons that we are sending to Ukraine are going to end up. We learned this lesson in Afghanistan. We learned this lesson in Iraq. We learned this lesson in Vietnam, and we're doing it all over again. There's no telling where those weapons are going to end up, and there's no telling who's going to be using them, who they're going to be shooting at. Yes, dear listener, it's very likely that within the next decade, children of America, people in the American military, are going to be facing their own weapons at the hands of some nefarious actor. They obtained those weapons through channels in eastern Ukraine. I hope the wheel, that little hamster wheel in your head, is spinning, dear listener, because the takeaway here is pretty simple. When you look at the outcome of your actions and you go back and look at your own intentions and you realize, wow, I may not have had the purest of intentions. I may have allowed some of these negative emotions to influence me in the actions that I took. What should an adult do? What should a wise, a responsible, a brave, a courageous person do? Admit they made a mistake and change the course of action. Now let's look at it from a macro standpoint. President Biden, the White House staff, members of Congress, they're leaning in to the sanctions that we've levied against Russia. They want to levy additional sanctions. They're leaning in to the money and the guns going into Ukraine to help fight the Russian army. They're leaning into failure. And although they're trying to play on our heartstrings, they're leaning in to their negative motivations, the negative emotions that are leading them in what I feel we can all agree is a failed direction. A direction that is not only making Russia richer, it's helping fuel the invasion costs. It's putting Russia in a completely different global position among nations. Russia may very well be one of the richest nations on planet Earth by the end of this invasion of Ukraine, if they're able to continue to rake in money the way that they are based on energy exports. China's going to buy. They don't have any option but to. India is going to buy. They don't have any option but to. So Russia has plenty of consumer base in order to continue to rake in these types of profits. How long are we going to lean into failure as a nation? But the reflection being, how long do we lean into failure as individual people? When we realize that we've made a mistake, and we realize that that mistake stemmed from unclean, impure motives. I guess this was just a long way of saying, adulting sucks.
Act 2. Hell is frozen. I sing the praises of social media.
In keeping with the theme of trying not to be such a whiny, preachy cunt, I'm actually going to sing the praises of the social medias. That's right. Singing the praises of the social medias. What is the social media good for? Unfortunately, given the fact that the earth does revolve around social media and that everything that's going to come to your attention is somehow going to be filtered through it, new art, music, television, movies, even our beloved books, these things will all be announced via the social medias. This is how they're going to publicize whatever the medium it's going to be publicized via the social medias. Being that I am not on the social medias, such that I am a terrible promoter of this very podcast. One of the things that I need to do is actually get on YouTube so I don't have to use so much of my time and effort creating additional content to try to promote the content that I'm creating on the podcast. That's a whole nother story. But I don't get on the social medias that often, even to promote this podcast. And I'm missing all of the announcements of the new music, the new movies, the new television shows, the new books. Case in point, I actually go on the Netflix, and I can't remember what I was watching. It was Narcos. I was watching the third season of Narcos, which came out last year, hadn't gotten around to it yet. Watching the third season of Narcos, the Mexico Narcos, and I eat it in small bites. I'm not one of these people who gets on Netflix and tears through an entire season of a show in 1 or 2 days. I eat it in small bites. I kept noticing that Peaky Blinders kept coming up in popular, in top 10, whatever the list, and believing the worst about all of these media companies, I thought to myself, Peaky Blinders is one of the older Netflix shows. I'm sure that they're pushing that as content onto viewers because they've got a bunch of new subscribers and they want to introduce them to content that they've got in the vault, so to speak, as well as the new content that they're rolling out. For the uninitiated, Peaky Blinders is a television show that appeared on BBC, the British Broadcasting Company, in England, and it had quite the following in England. It was so popular that Netflix ended up buying it to make it available worldwide, and I believe they did so in roughly 2016, maybe 2017. Excellent period piece. It's about a gang that was formed in roughly 1880 or 1890 in England. It's based on a real gang that existed, and it takes the story of that gang and interposes it on a group of gypsies in England roughly 30 years later at the end of World War I. So the year the troops come pouring back in and members of the gang have gone off and served in France in World War I, coming back to England and trying to put the gang back together, put the band back together. Stylistically, it's a brilliant television program. It was fun to watch. It's 6 episodes per season. They are an hour long, and they are an hour. There's no commercial breaks. Obviously, it's on Netflix, so you're getting 55 minutes of programming per episode. Very easy to consume, but for the fact that there's gratuitous violence. As a fan of the show, I was happy that Netflix, in my mind, was promoting the show again to new subscribers, and I went about my merry way, finished Narcos Season 3 Mexico, and didn't go back to the Netflix for a month, 6 weeks. Ended up going back on Netflix about a week ago to watch the documentary on Warren Jeffs, the crazy Mormon pedophile that actually had a compound here in the state of Arizona, had one in Utah, and ended up having one in Texas. And when I turned on the Netflix, as Netflix does, it plays a preview of whatever you have scrolled over, and I noticed that when I scrolled over the Peaky Blinders, I did not see something that I recognized. It was not an episode that I remembered having seen. Investigating further, I realized they dropped a 6th season. I had no idea that they were shooting a 6th season. I had no idea that the season had actually been released. I had no idea that the reason why it was so popular is because all of the people like me who had so enjoyed the show knew about it because they had been a part of the social medias. Now, if you haven't watched Peaky Blinders on Netflix, you've made a mistake, and that's okay. We all make mistakes. Part of the reason why I'm doing this podcast is to address and to reconcile all of the mistakes that I've made in my life. Do I want to see you commit all the same errors that I did? No, of course not. But if you have, let's do this together. Let's admit that we've made a mistake, because we can't move forward with the solution until we admit we actually did something wrong. Yes, dear listener, if you haven't watched Peaky Blinders yet, you've done something wrong. During one of the episodes, and I'm not going to spoil any of the episodes of Season 6, I was actually so impressed with Season 6 and what they did stylistically, what they did with the plot, how they actually put it all together. I thought about doing another episode breakdown similar to what I'm doing for Better Call Saul, though I've decided against it. This will suffice. The last episode of the 6th season, the crescendo, the end of the episode, something gigantic, momentous, important is happening. And I hear a song come on, and it sounds to me like Radiohead. The music sounds so consistent with Radiohead, and it's not a Radiohead song I've ever heard before. This song builds as the scene is building. It's perfectly placed, and sure enough, when the vocals start, it's Tom York. I have no doubt in my mind that's Tom York. And I'm thinking to myself, there's new Radiohead out there. I have not only missed the dropping of Season 6 of Peaky Blinders, I've missed a new Radiohead album. A man isolated from the social medias, not knowing, ignorant, though clumsy and buffoonish, with technology in hand, I was able to go to the Shazam and listen to the song, and it's not Radiohead. It is Tom York. It is Johnny Greenwood, Tom York, the vocalist for Radiohead, also guitarist, bassist, keyboardist. Johnny Greenwood, guitarist, bassist, keyboardist for Radiohead. It's a new band, a side project that they created with the drummer from the Sons of Kemet. It's called The Smile. during COVID, under the veil of secrecy of COVID. York, Greenwood, and this guy Tom Skinner began recording, and they, to the surprise of the world, end up showing up at a festival last year, playing some of these songs, and then dropping an album in May. I had absolutely no idea. The album is called A Light for Attracting Attention. The band is The Smile. The album is A Light for Attracting Attention. Absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you, universe. I will give this repugnant, rat-infested cesspool of a social media landscape another chance. At least until I see someone dancing on it again.
Act 3, Episode 9 recap of Better Call Saul.
Better Call Saul. Final season. Episode 9. Threw me for a loop. Not that I'm so married to my theory that the character played by Rhea Seehorn so well that Kim Wexler is somehow still involved in the universe of Breaking Bad, that she's part of this amalgam we call Saul Goodman. As with many things that I've predicted would come to pass on this podcast, I have been wrong, and I may very well be wrong here. No, I was simply confused, if you will, confused by how the transition between Kim leaving Jimmy and then Jimmy becoming that Saul Goodman character that we know in Breaking Bad, the quick turn, I just didn't see it coming. And clearly there's more to the story. There's more to come in these final 4 episodes. It is not uncommon in the world of Breaking Bad, in the world of Better Call Saul, that you have some of these time gaps that really aren't set forth in a way that's including the viewer. You know that there has been some time elapsed. You just don't know how much time. You don't know what events have transpired. And very often, those events are illuminated in other later episodes of the television program. So how the Jimmy character, who's begging Kim to stay, goes from that desperate, that meager state to the Saul Goodman character paying a prostitute to leave, getting ready to go to work in his new office, his, in the timeline of the show of Better Call Saul, revamped office, the one that we recognize, of course, from the later years in Breaking Bad. Clearly there are gaps, there are holes that are going to be filled in. Kim Wexler's story has not been fully told yet, nor has Jimmy McGill's story, the full turn to the Saul Goodman character. One of the things that dawned on me is that it's very likely that Kim, in some capacity, is still in the universe in Breaking Bad, is still somehow part of the brain trust that is the Saul Goodman character. And yet, it may be in a role that I had not yet envisioned. It may be in a capacity that is much less a willing and enthusiastic participant, and it may be out of a sense of loyalty, a sense of love, a sense of pity that the Jimmy McGill that she once saw so much promise in, now reduced to this Saul Goodman character, still reaches out and is asking for help, for advice, to strategize in some of the situations that he's involved in, and Kim can't help but do it. Seeing how Jimmy was pleading with her to stay, and the weight of everything that had happened and everything that they had done, and Kim expressing the fact that she is afraid of herself when she's with Jimmy. She's afraid of how much she enjoys what they're capable of doing, what they're capable of creating, or more accurately, what they're capable of destroying. Speculation aside, I thought it was an excellent episode, as these episodes in the final season have been. But because this isn't simply giving flowers, as the kids would say, I do have another nit to pick. And pick it I shall, and I shall right now. Watching any television program involving medicine or the law, if you are involved in these professions, ruins the television program. The law, medicine, these are boring, formulaic, dull professions with some of the least compelling people in America involved in their day-to-day operations. The cartoonish figures that are often doctors and or lawyers are in no way, shape, or form representative of who these people are in real life. They're just boring, run-of-the-mill, egotistic assholes. I count myself among their hallowed ranks. The colorful, larger-than-life personalities are a creation of Hollywood. Likewise, the operation of these professions, the day-to-day grind, law, medicine, boring as hell. Some of you may remember that in the height of the law and order frenzy, back in probably the late 90s, early 2000s, there was a television program on NBC where it was essentially like Law and Order, following a case through the preparation for trial, working with the police. This is prosecutors working with the police, and then going through the trial, actually televising the trial. And not like court TV, it was much more snippets because it would only fit into about an hour-long program. The program did terribly. The way criminal civil procedure works, the way trials work, it's very mundane, it's very boring. It's almost like an analogy to war. It is long periods of boredom with brief periods of sheer terror. Hollywood has to dramatize these things, has to create larger-than-life characters, because otherwise no one would watch. Why do I bring this up? Well, I'm going to have to go into some of that boring tedium that is the practice of law and how it actually operated grossly in contrast with something that happened in episode 9 of this final season of Better Call Saul. Cue to Kim Wexler sitting in court with her client, waiting for the judge to come out to hear a motion that she had filed about suppressing a certain piece of evidence. She files, very late mind you, a motion to withdraw. And in the histrionics of this conversation between Wexler, the judge, the prosecutor, she blurts out, "I am no longer an attorney. I notified the bar. I can't represent this guy." Mic drop. Didn't work on me. No mic drop moment on me. As an attorney, any attorney will tell you this. If you file a motion to withdraw that late, where the judge is basically walking in and you just filed moments before the hearing, many courts will say, "I'm not considering this motion. I don't care what it is." Moreover, withdrawing your licensure is a process that many attorneys are familiar with. You can go inactive or you can actually resign. Going inactive basically means you are no longer going to keep up with the requirements necessary to have an active bar license. This is namely the continuing legal education requirements. You are still a licensed attorney. You are just not an active licensed attorney, which means that you cannot file a pleading with a court. You cannot represent a client. Resigning one's membership from the bar, that's completely different. That is you saying, "I don't want to practice anymore. I don't want to have any obligation whatsoever as an attorney." You're basically going to have me on your rolls as having been a licensed attorney from date X to date Y. After date Y, I'm completely done. I have to, if I want to practice again, completely reapply, submit a new application as if I had never practiced law before. Now, state ethics rules notwithstanding, it may be different in some states. It may be a different type of requirement. It may be called something different. But Kim is, for all intents and purposes, she's quitting it all. She's quitting the law altogether. This is not a rubber stamp process, dear listener. You can't just go into the bar association and say, I want to resign my membership, and they stamp a form and it's just done. And it's precisely for the reasons that were illustrated in the episode that you saw. If you are representing clients and they have active cases, you just can't resign and say, good luck, clients. I hope you find another attorney, particularly where, as Kim had done, you have filed dispositive motions before the court that are outstanding. Very often, a bar association is going to tell you, you have active cases, you have money that's either in your trust account or is owed to clients. You need to have every one of those active cases reassigned to another attorney. We have to have a balancing of the trust account. So if that client has $3,000 in a trust account with you to be used on that case, we want to see that that money's been transferred. We want to see that your trust account's been zeroed out. We want to see that you don't have any active cases anymore. And then you can resign. Specific to the circumstance that was orchestrated in episode 9 of Better Call Saul, the judge would have said, okay, you submitted your resignation. It hasn't been approved yet. You can argue this motion, and you will. I understand fully that this entire scene was orchestrated for dramatic effect in the television program. I found it a clever way to introduce this concept to the viewer that Kim is so upset with everything that's happened and the way that she's handled herself, even though she's done so masterfully, that she's going to quit the law and she's going to leave Jimmy. How can they drop that bombshell? This is the way that they could do it. She's in court. She's come to this conclusion. It's not been something that she's been contemplating. It's spur of the moment. She goes in the day that she goes in and realizes, I can't do this anymore. I can't be with Jimmy anymore. I'm resigning my bar membership. I'm resigning as an attorney. I'm not going to practice law anymore. I'm going to go home. I'm going to start packing my things. It's all over. As a device in furtherance of the overall storyline, I do understand it, if not even appreciate it. The problem, as it is for most people who are in these types of industries, again, the two biggest as far as television programs go, medicine and law, and I should throw in law enforcement. I'm sure law enforcement agents routinely watch the television shows that are on the networks and laugh at what's being represented on them. It threw me off. I had to take a moment because I realized what was happening in the show and I wanted to suspend my disbelief to allow the gravity of that to set in so I could continue to follow along. Yet I followed the situation as it was set forth in the television program in contrast to what the reality is of how that would work, how an actual resignation would work. And yes, I was put off. I had to, how do I say this? Tell my ego to shut up, tell the lawyer in me to shut up, and to continue to follow along in the program. Nits officially picked. In furtherance, though, of the whole storyline about Kim and the amount of regret that she has and her own sense of dislike of who she is with Jimmy, I thought that the scene where she and Jimmy had to go and talk to Howard's wife, the widower, as it were, and Kim to reinforce the theory that they had created themselves, that Howard was a drug addict, tells a complete and total lie in such a convincing fashion, and in front of one of their dupes, someone that they actually duped into believing that this story about Howard was true, such that when turning to Clifford Maine to confirm that this whole theory, that these allegations that Howard was a drug addict was complete and total bullshit, Maine himself had to give that shoulder shrug and say, I saw these same things too, and didn't say anything to any of Howard's contemporaries or his loved ones. I kept it to myself. The way Kim and Jimmy, when they're walking through the parking garage, they embrace, she kisses him, and then she coldly drives away. Something was up. I couldn't put my finger on it. Clearly I knew that she was upset, but something was up. Did I see her quitting the law and leaving Jimmy in that moment? No, I did not. But the way that they set up her mindset, I thought was very well constructed. Here, Kim has to be put in a position again to do something that she actually enjoys and does very well. Lie. Lie to someone in furtherance of a story that they've created in order to reach some end. And she does so spectacularly, and I guess in the totality of that moment, within the universe of the show, she makes the decision, I'm done with all of this. I don't want to be this person, and I don't want to be involved in this life anymore. For the sake of brevity, I could talk about a number of different storylines that were in this one episode. I wanted to point out one that I think is remarkable because it answers a question that I think is lingering about one of the characters that's been implied throughout the course of not only Breaking Bad, but of Better Call Saul. It's Gus Fring, it's his home life, it's his sexual orientation. The scene where he goes to the restaurant and is talking to either the sommelier or a manager, potentially, of the establishment, then making what was very subtly, yet very explicitly, an overture towards this person, an invitation to partake in a very rare bottle of wine, which would ostensibly take place in Gus Fring's home, and to have it not rejected, but not recognized. The sommelier not reading between the lines, thinking eagerly that he's going off to please what is a very high spending and a very particular, a very sophisticated customer. I thought the writing, the acting, the execution of that entire scene was brilliant. It was not necessary whatsoever within the universe of the show. It not only better defined the character of Gus Fring, but again, it humanized him. Look at the world through the lens of his perspective. Where does a drug kingpin find companionship, particularly one that is homosexual, particularly one that is very guarded about his reputation? Contrast that with what you saw at the end of the episode with the Saul Goodman character. The flashiness, the flamboyance, the over-the-top cartoonish character that Saul Goodman is. And what is he doing? He's having a prostitute sleep over, one that has probably slept over enough that she knows the score. She gets up, gets ready, comes down and gets herself a granola bar and the money for the night, and is off. One character doing everything that he can to hide not only who he is from a professional standpoint, an entrepreneur that is in fact a drug cartel kingpin, also protecting his personal life, knowing that his personal life being compromised can compromise his professional life. Whereas you have the Saul Goodman character indulging, reveling in that flamboyant, over-the-top rock star, I think you could call it, lifestyle. This is why I can go on for 20 minutes in a heartbeat about this television program. There's very few on TV like it, where the characters are so well written and so well humanized on the screen and actually in service of the overall storyline. Quick thoughts for the end. I am interested to see who Mike can actually find, what contractor and what crew he can find to finish the lab. I'm not sure whether or not it's going to be a reference made back to a character or characters that we've been introduced to in the universe of Breaking Bad or even in Better Call Saul. So it's possible on a 4-episode arc we are going to be introduced to a brand new character within this universe. That does not seem like a long time to have a brand new character, but if any show could pull it off and to give that character life, it's Vince Gilligan and crew in Better Call Saul or Breaking Bad. This is Why Don't Vote, a podcast.